The morning sun, pale and tentative as a new promise, slanted through the immaculate bay windows of Alara's kitchen. It caught the steam rising from her coffee cup, turning it into a transient, ghostly wisp. On her laptop screen, the online banking portal was open. A single line of text, dated today, glowed with a quiet, profound significance. Direct deposit, sterling, R, amount, redacted. Alara took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. The taste was rich, the warmth a familiar comfort. This notification, arriving like clockwork on the 5th of every month, was more than just money. It was validation. It was security. It was the architectural blueprint of the new life she had meticulously constructed for herself over the past 2 years. At 44, Alara had the kind of hard-won poise that only comes from navigating a storm and finding a safe harbor. The storm had been her 21-year marriage to Sterling. He was a titan in the healthcare investment world, a man who spoke in quarterly earnings and whose heart beat to the rhythm of the stock market ticker. He had built an empire, and in doing so, had left his own family feeling like a distant, underperforming asset. Their divorce had been her emancipation. While her friends had whispered condolences, Alara had been privately celebrating the deal of a lifetime alimony. And, the crown jewel, she remained on his premier health insurance plan. For a woman who had traded her own burgeoning career in art curation to raise 4 children and manage the sprawling domestic enterprise that was Sterling's life, it felt less like a settlement and more like long overdue severance pay. Her home, a beautifully restored Victorian that Sterling had detested for its inefficient layout, was now her sanctuary. Every polished floorboard, every carefully chosen antique, was a testament to her freedom. She moved through the quiet rooms with a sense of ownership she'd never felt in the sterile, modernist mansion they had once shared. That place had been Sterling's. This was hers. The peace was interrupted by the thunder of feet on the stairs. Liam, her 16-year-old, appeared in the doorway, his hair a chaotic sculpture of sleep. "Mom, have you seen my history textbook?" he mumbled, rummaging through a pile of mail on the counter. "On the bookshelf in the den, where you left it," Alara said without looking up. "And don't forget you have soccer practice at 4. I'll be there by 4:30. "Okay, thanks." He grabbed an apple and was gone, a teenage whirlwind of fleeting needs. This was her life now. A predictable, manageable rhythm. The frantic, one-sided effort of her marriage was gone. No more canceled date nights because of a market fluctuation in Asia. No more family dinners where Sterling's chair sat empty, his presence a ghost represented only by the constant buzzing of his phone on the charger. She had felt like a single mother for the better part of 2 decades. Now, at least, she was being compensated for it. Her part-time job as an administrator at a local art gallery kept her mind engaged without overwhelming her. It was a gentle re-entry into the professional world she had abandoned, a way to feel connected to something beyond school runs and grocery lists. As she rinsed her coffee cup, she glanced at her reflection in the window. The lines around her eyes were more pronounced than they had been, but they were her own. They weren't etched by anxiety over a husband's moods or disappointment over another broken promise. She looked stable. In control, she had built this fortress brick by financial brick. She believed it to be impenetrable. The life she now lived was a quiet, orderly kingdom, and she was its undisputed solvent queen. It was a life born not of passion, but of pragmatism. And for Alara, after 21 years of Sterling's drama, pragmatism felt a lot like peace. The barbecue was loud, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and freshly cut grass. Alara was nursing a glass of white wine, feeling a comfortable sense of detachment from the boisterous crowd. It had been 10 months since the divorce was finalized, and her social life was slowly reawakening, like a dormant plant testing the spring air. "Alara, I want you to meet someone." Her friend Chloe steered a man towards her. "This is Reese. Reese, this is my friend Alara I was telling you about." Alara turned, a polite smile fixed on her face. And then the smile became genuine. Reese wasn't imposing like Sterling, who entered a room like a conquering general. Reese had a gentler energy. He was 39, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a smile that seemed to start there before spreading to his lips. He was wearing a faded band t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the bespoke suits that were Sterling's uniform. "It's great to finally meet you," he said, his voice warm and steady. Chloe talks about your eye for art. I confess, I know nothing about it, but I'm a great listener. That one sentence disarmed her completely. In Sterling's world, admitting you knew nothing about a subject was a fatal weakness. Conversations were contests, opportunities to assert dominance. With Reese, it felt like an invitation. They talked for over an hour, standing by a sprawling oak tree as the party swirled around them. He was a social worker, specializing in youth services. He spoke about his work not with the self-important gravity of Sterling, but with a quiet passion and a palpable empathy for the kids he was trying to help. He asked her about her old career, about the artists she admired, and he didn't just wait for his turn to speak, he listened. He asked follow-up questions. It was a conversation, not a negotiation. When she mentioned her 4 children, he didn't flinch or offer a look of pity. As so many men did, he simply asked, "What are they like?" A week later, he called and asked her out. Their first date was a walk along the river, followed by coffee at a small independent shop. He didn't try to impress her with a flashy, expensive restaurant. He seemed utterly uninterested in the currency of status that had governed her old life. He was interested in her. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Reese introduced her to the radical concept of spontaneity. One evening, he showed up at her door with takeout from an Indian restaurant she'd mentioned in passing 3 weeks earlier. Sterling, who had an assistant to manage his own schedule, would never have retained such a minor detail. He was present. When they were together, his phone stayed in his pocket. He wasn't one half of a couple, with the other half of his brain tethered to an unending stream of work emergencies. He made her feel seen, desired, and interesting. The intimacy between them was electrifying, a rediscovery of a part of herself she thought had been permanently mothballed by years of Sterling's exhaustion and disinterest. Alara felt herself unfurling. The carefully controlled composure she had cultivated began to soften. She laughed more freely, a deep, genuine sound that surprised even herself. She was rediscovering the woman she'd been before she became Mrs. Sterling, the woman who loved modern art, who could get lost in a conversation, who could be swept up in a moment of unplanned joy. They kept things relaxed. He wasn't pushing to meet her kids, and she was grateful for the space. They maintained separate finances, a clean and simple arrangement that felt modern and safe. He had his life, she had hers, and they met in the beautiful, sunlit space in between. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance, Reese took her hand. "You know," he said softly, "you have this incredible calm about you. But sometimes I see a flicker of something else, something you keep locked away." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's 2 decades of baggage, Reese. It takes a while to unpack." "I've got time," he said, and the simple sincerity of his words felt more valuable than any stock portfolio. In that moment, Alara believed she had achieved the impossible, the perfect equilibrium. The financial security of her past was the foundation, and the emotional fulfillment of her present was the beautiful life being built upon it. It was a flawless, balanced equation. She had it all. The perfect equilibrium, Alara soon discovered, was a delicate thing. The first tremor was subtle, a hairline crack in the serene facade of her new life. It began with Reese's comments. They were never malicious, but they carried a dissonant undertone. They'd be walking past a high-end store, and he'd remark with a light laugh, "Must be nice not having to check the price tag." Or, when she mentioned paying for Liam's expensive soccer camp, he'd say, "Wish I had someone covering my bills. That security must be an amazing feeling." She would try to explain gently. "It's not for nothing, Reese. I earned it. 21 years is a long time to give up." "Oh, I know," he'd say, but a shadow of something envy perhaps, or a simple lack of understanding would linger in his eyes. He saw the end result, the comfortable life, but he couldn't truly grasp the monumental sacrifice that had been its purchase price. He saw it as a windfall, not a reparation. The tremor intensified 8 months into their relationship. A late period sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through Alara. At 44, with her youngest child now 12, the thought of starting over with a baby was her most visceral nightmare. It wasn't just the physical and emotional toll, it was the financial cataclysm it would represent. A new baby would be a new dependent, a complication that could unravel everything. She bought a test, her hands trembling as she opened the box. Reese was with her, his face a mask of concern. They waited the longest 3 minutes of her life in the silent, pristine bathroom of her Victorian sanctuary. Negative. A wave of relief so powerful it left her dizzy washed over Ilara. She leaned against the cool marble of the countertop, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But when she looked at Reese, she didn't see the same relief. He was staring at the negative test stick with a strange, philosophical expression. "You know," he said slowly, turning to her. "That was terrifying. But it makes you think, doesn't it?" "It makes me think I need to be more careful," she said, her voice still shaky. "No, I mean about us," he pressed. "About what we're building. Are we just having fun like college kids, or is this serious?" A knot of apprehension tightened in Alara's stomach. "I thought what we have is great. Why does it need a label? Because if we're going to be sexually active like this, if we're going to have scares like this, maybe we should be living together. Like real partners," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and full of consequence. She tried to explain, her tone carefully practical. "Reese, moving in together? That's a huge step. Legally, it could affect my settlement with Sterling." He frowned, the easy warmth in his eyes replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Why would it matter? It's our life." "It matters to the court system," she said, feeling a familiar frustration creeping in. "They would see it as me being supported by another person. They could reduce or even eliminate my alimony." This was the first time the stark reality of her financial dependence had collided so directly with the soft, romantic world she had built with Reese. He didn't seem to grasp the gravity of it. He saw her beautiful house, her comfortable lifestyle, and he couldn't connect it to the fragile legal agreement that underpinned it all. He saw a fortress. She knew it was a house of cards that could be blown over by a single, poorly considered move. From that day on, the conversation became a recurring theme. Reese began talking constantly about relationship escalation, meeting her kids officially, spending holidays together as a blended family, and, always, the idea of moving in. Alara felt a gentle pressure becoming a persistent push. She was being asked to jeopardize the very foundation of her stability for a future that felt uncertain. His nonprofit salary was admirable, but it was a rowboat next to the aircraft carrier of Sterling's income. Losing her alimony would not be a lifestyle adjustment, it would be a catastrophic failure. The easy, sunlit space between them began to shrink, crowded with his expectations and her anxieties. The perfect equilibrium was wobbling, and Alara found herself clinging desperately to her side of the equation, the side marked security. The proposal came on a random Tuesday night. There was no fanfare, no romantic dinner. They had just finished watching a movie on her couch, the remnants of popcorn in a bowl on the coffee table. The scene was so domestic, so comfortable, that the sudden shift in gravity was dizzying. Reese turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically solemn. He took her hands in his. "Alara," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "these last months have been the best of my life. You've woken up something in me." Alara's heart began to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm. She knew where this was going. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I love you. I want to build a real life with you. I want to help you raise your kids. I want to be your partner, in everything." He opened the box. Inside sat a simple, elegant ring with a small, clear stone. "Will you marry me?" The question landed in the quiet room like a detonation. For a moment, Alara couldn't breathe. All she could see was a flowchart in her mind, a series of brutal, binary choices. Marriage to Reese meant the immediate and permanent termination of her alimony. It meant the loss of her health insurance. It meant tethering the financial survival of herself and her 4 children to Reese's modest income. It wasn't a proposal. It was a demand for her to perform an act of financial suicide. She looked from the earnest hope in his eyes to the ring, and a cold wave of reality washed over her. Love was a beautiful, powerful thing, but it didn't pay for college tuition or orthodontist bills. "Reese," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can't." The hope in his face collapsed, replaced by a wounded confusion. "What? What do you mean you can't?" She tried to be gentle, to frame it in the sterile language of logistics rather than emotion. "It's not about my feelings for you. It's about the reality of my situation. If I remarry, everything stops. The alimony, the insurance, everything. We couldn't survive. A family of 6 on your salary, it's just not possible. So it's about money," he said, his voice flat. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling bitterness. It's about Sterling's money. I'm entering. It's not about his money. It's about my children's security, she countered, her voice rising with a desperate need to make him understand. I'm not just choosing for myself. I have responsibilities. But he couldn't see past his own rejection. He saw her choosing a check from her ex-husband over a future with him. He didn't see a responsible mother protecting her children. He saw a materialistic woman who was too comfortable in her gilded cage to take a risk on love. The conversation ended in a tense, wounded silence. The proposal had been a bridge he tried to build between their two worlds, and her refusal had blown it to pieces. The days that followed were excruciating. The easy intimacy they shared evaporated, replaced by a palpable tension. Every conversation felt like a minefield. He became distant, his calls less frequent. When they were together, a chasm of unspoken resentment lay between them. He would make passive-aggressive digs, couched in therapeutic jargon. Maybe you need to figure out what you're really committed to, Ilara. Is it a person or a financial arrangement? It was so unfair. He was painting her as a mercenary when all she was being was a mother. 2 months after the disastrous proposal, he delivered the ultimatum. It came during a clipped, emotionless phone call. I can't do this anymore, Ilara, he said. I can't be in a relationship that has no future. Either we're building a life together, which means marriage, or we're wasting each other's time. Reese, I've explained why that's not an option for me right now, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Then, I guess you've made your choice, he said. And with a quiet goodbye, he ended it. Just like that. 8 months of warmth and laughter and feeling seen, gone. Ilara sank onto her kitchen floor, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dead air. Tears of frustration and grief streamed down her face. She had been forced to choose between romantic idealism and practical survival. She had chosen survival. She told herself it was the only choice a sane, responsible person could make. If Reese couldn't understand that, then he wasn't the right man for her. But the reassurance felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the profound ache of her loss. 4 months after the breakup, Ilara was beginning to find her footing again. The ache of losing Reese had subsided into a dull, chronic sorrow, but the orderly kingdom of her life remained intact. The direct deposit still arrived. The children were thriving. She told herself she had weathered the emotional storm and her pragmatic choice had been validated. Then, the phone rang. The caller ID flashed a name she hadn't seen in months, Sterling. A knot of ice formed in her stomach. Sterling never called unless it was something clinically important, a tax document, a decision about one of the children's trust funds. He didn't do pleasantries. Ilara, he said. His voice clipped and devoid of warmth. There was an unnerving edge to it she couldn't place. Smugness. Sterling, is everything all right? Everything is excellent, he said, drawing out the word. I'm calling to give you a courtesy heads up. I'm getting remarried. The world tilted on its axis. Ilara gripped the kitchen counter for support, the smooth, cool marble suddenly feeling like the edge of a cliff. Remarried. The word was an explosion, sending shockwaves through every corner of her carefully constructed life. You're what? She stammered, her mind struggling to process the information. This was the man who, during their divorce proceedings, had lectured her on the fiscal irresponsibility of marriage, who had claimed he would never entangle his assets that way again. Her name is Amelia, he continued, the smugness in his voice now unmistakable. She's a nurse at the hospital, wonderful woman, very understanding of the demands of my career. Younger, Ilara thought with a dizzying certainty. Someone who sees his 70-hour work weeks as dedication, not abandonment. The legal clause from their divorce decree screamed in her mind, a fire alarm she could no longer ignore. All alimony and health benefit payments shall cease immediately and permanently upon the remarriage of either party. 21 years of marriage. 4 children. A sacrificed career. All of it had been converted into this single life-sustaining financial stream. And with 4 words, I'm getting remarried? Sterling was turning off the tap. Sterling, wait, she said, her voice a desperate plea. You can't. We need to talk about this. Maybe we can delay it? Work something out? I need time to adjust. A dry, mirthless chuckle came down the line. It was the cruelest sound she had ever heard. Adjust? He said. That's interesting. Maybe now you'll finally understand what it feels like to have your financial future completely dictated by someone else's romantic choices. The audacity of it stole her breath. He was twisting the knife, framing her as the one who had made a choice that ruined him. "I was an excellent wife to you," she said, her voice shaking with a sudden white-hot fury. "I managed your entire life so you could build your empire. I raised your children. This is how you repay that sacrifice?" "I'm repaying it by moving on with my life, Alara. I suggest you do the same," he said coolly. "The wedding is in 10 weeks. Consider this your official notice." The line went dead. Alara stood frozen in her sunlit kitchen, the phone slipping from her numb fingers and clattering onto the floor. 10 weeks. She had 10 weeks to replace an income that had taken her 21 years to earn. 10 weeks before her fortress, the one she had sacrificed a loving relationship to protect, was scheduled for total demolition. The irony was so brutal, so savage, it felt like a physical blow. She had turned down Reese, a man who loved her, to protect this very security. She had chosen the predictable, stable check from Sterling over the uncertainty of a shared life with a man of modest means. And now, a woman named Amelia, a stranger, had more power over her future than she did. The fortress hadn't just been breached. She realized with sickening clarity that it had never been a fortress at all. It was a prison, and the parole she thought was for life had just been revoked by the warden. 8 months later, Alara's world was unrecognizable. The sun still slanted through her bay windows, but it no longer illuminated a kingdom of peace. It exposed the dust motes dancing in the air of a life in frantic disarray. She had found a full-time job, a grueling, soul-crushing position in corporate communications for a bland real estate conglomerate. Her days were a blur of synergistic jargon and meaningless PowerPoint presentations. It paid the mortgage, just barely, but it chipped away at her spirit with every passing hour. The part-time gallery job, her small connection to a world of beauty, was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her largest new expense was a marketplace health insurance plan with a deductible so high it was practically useless. The monthly premium was more than her old car payment, a constant, hemorrhaging wound in her already anemic budget. Liam was looking at colleges, and the glossy brochures that filled their mailbox felt like taunts. The college funds Sterling had set up were substantial, but they were never meant to cover the full cost. The Alimony had been the designated source for tuition support. Now, when Liam spoke excitedly about visiting a campus on the East Coast, Alara felt a wave of nausea, a mix of maternal pride and sheer financial terror. How could she tell him that his dreams might have to shrink to fit their new, smaller reality? The digital world became a landscape of torture. Sterling, once a ghost on social media, was now a prolific poster. There he was, with his luminous new wife, Amelia, at Liam's soccer games. There they were, baking cookies in her old kitchen with her youngest daughter, Chloe. The captions were nauseatingly cheerful. "So blessed to have a partner who understands the importance of family time." It was like watching someone else live in the house she had built, except they were living an upgraded version, with a new and improved Sterling who had apparently, miraculously, learned the meaning of work-life balance. He had been trained for 2 decades on her time, and now Amelia was reaping the rewards. Then there was Reese. A mutual friend had let it slip that he was dating someone new, a fellow social worker from his office. A quick, masochistic search confirmed it. His profile was filled with pictures of a smiling, carefree woman. They were at the river walk where he and Alara had their first date. They were at the little coffee shop he had shown her. She looked happy, unburdened. Probably because she didn't have 4 children and a vindictive ex-husband complicating her life. She was free to make romantic decisions without having to consult a spreadsheet first. The judgment from the outside world was a constant, low-grade hum of disapproval. Her own mother had said it, her voice laced with disappointment. "Maybe you should have said yes to that nice young man, Alara. You prioritized money over love, and now you have neither." Even her friends, in their attempts to be supportive, would let it slip. "It's just such a shame. If only you'd known Sterling would do this." "But I didn't know," she wanted to scream. "I made the smartest decision possible with the information I had." She hadn't chosen money over love. She had chosen responsibility over recklessness. She had chosen her children's guaranteed security over a romantic fantasy funded by hope and good intentions. How could she have predicted that Sterling, the man who hated the institution of marriage, would find someone willing to tolerate his epic absenteeism. How was she supposed to know that her carefully calculated risk assessment was based on a faulty premise? The most bitter pill to swallow was the stark, undeniable truth. She was worse off now than if she had simply stayed married to Sterling. At least then, she would have had the health insurance, the financial stability, the house. She would have still been lonely, but it would have been a comfortable, well-funded loneliness. Her attempt to be smart had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Late one night, after paying a mountain of bills that left her account perilously low, Alara sat in her dark kitchen, the ghosts of her past choices swirling around her. Sterling had his fairy tale, Reese had his uncomplicated love story, and she was cast as the villain in both narratives. The cold, materialistic woman who got what she deserved. But as the bitterness washed over her, something else rose to the surface, a hard, defiant core of indignation. What about her sacrifices? The career she abandoned? The 21 years she had poured into building someone else's life? She refused to take the blame for this disaster. Reese had offered her idealism, not a viable plan. Sterling's new wife was benefiting from all the groundwork Alara had laid. And she, Alara, was left to start over at 44, with nothing to show for 2 decades of marriage, but 4 incredible children and a profound, searing bitterness. Let them all judge her. Let them write their stories and cast her as they pleased. She knew what she had been trying to do. She had been trying to protect her family. She had been trying to be smart. At the time, it had made perfect, undeniable sense. It wasn't her fault that the world didn't play by logical rules. She had played the hand she was dealt the best way she knew how. And if that wasn't good enough for anyone else, that was their problem, not hers. She held on to that thought like a shard of glass, a painful, sharp-edged truth in the wreckage of her life. It was all she had left.